Another video? Wild! Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckosphere, where we talk about all aspects of climate change and the clean energy transition. If those are topics that you care about, please hit the subscribe button below and ring the bell so you don't miss every single time I post. And if you don't miss every single time I post, hi, welcome back. Thanks for being here. Whale deaths along the U.S. East Coast are not due to offshore wind farm prep work. That is what now 3 federal agencies have concluded after misdirected animal activists began protesting projects. The Marine Mammal Commission, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, found no connections between offshore wind production and the recent deaths of 16 humpback whales and 1 critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. The National Marine Fisheries Service declared an unusual mortality event for humpback whales back in 2016, and these recent deaths seem to fall under that category. Of the whales researchers were able to study, evidence shows that at least 40% of deaths were due to being tangled in fishing gear or being hit by ships. The number of deaths is not actually unusual, according to the service, especially with the whale population size in the Northeast growing. Despite all this information, 2 New Jersey Republican congressmen announced legislation last month to investigate, pause, or halt offshore wind operations in the name of the whales. About 30 New Jersey mayors have signed a letter calling for a moratorium on offshore wind projects and an investigation into whether the whale deaths are related to such work, despite we already know that. They all must have been reading Fox News or Newsmax, which failed to report all of this information I said prior, despite talking with NOAA officials for the articles. Even Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene got in on spreading a debunked correlation between offshore wind farms and whale deaths.
You know, some people talk about, for example, wind turbines contributing to the death of whales and bird life, etc. In that case, nobody wants to seem to talk about that. And then you have this toxic chemical mess in Ohio, in Palestine, that we reported on earlier in the program, and I don't hear anything from the new Green Deal climate alarmist cult about what is an environmental disaster by every measure. Why?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know why AOC isn't dressed in white and crying for the dead whales that keep washing on the beach from wind farms that are being placed all over the ocean. And people are calling the alarms over how this is not only killing unknown thousands of bird species, but also causing whales to beach themselves at record numbers.
This misinformation has resulted in Marine Mammal Stranding Center staff receiving threatening messages, in addition to the potential political ramifications I previously mentioned. Conservative think tanks like the Heartland Institute and the Cesar Rodney Institute have been tied to these whale wind misinformation, which has spread in many anti-wind Facebook pages. The most ironic part of all of this is that while the wind farm projects off New Jersey don't threaten any whale populations, the Vineyard Wind project off of Massachusetts actually might. It's supposed to go in an important right whale hub, but the developers know this and are trying out an AI technology to avoid any whale casualties. The AI computer vision system was developed by Charles River Analytics and is being used by vessels ferrying materials to the construction site 15 miles south of Martha's Vineyard. This tech is used in conjunction with human observers on the vessel. The farm, which will be up and running next year, will provide clean energy to more than 400,000 homes. The 3 offshore wind farms in the works off the coast of New Jersey will power almost 3 million homes once they're completed, which will be between 2024 and 2028, depending on which project you're talking about. What do you think of all this offshore wind controversy? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, especially if you live on the East Coast. Okay, now we've got to talk about the Norfolk Southern train derailment in Ohio. I've got some climate change angles to share with that disaster, but let's first start with a summary of what happened. As I'm sure we all know by now, on February 3rd, a train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, spilling 10,000 gallons of vinyl chloride into the local waterways. Vinyl chloride is a toxic and highly flammable chemical used to make PVC plastics. The company responsible, Norfolk Southern, organized a controlled burn of the substances that might have otherwise exploded uncontrollably. The resulting black plume of smoke that was created was so large that it could be seen by satellite. Instantly, residents started reporting respiratory problems and skin irritation while their homes and water smelled like chemicals. Hundreds of thousands of fish died, and the local environment sadly went the way of Silent Spring. For an unknown reason that baffles everyone, the EPA allowed Norfolk Southern to contract out environmental testing, which unsurprisingly reported that all the drinking water and air is fine. You can go back to what you're doing, folks. Local politicians even held a party to drink the local water to try to convince all the residents that everything will be fine, but many didn't buy it. Even independent scientists determined that the amount of contamination in the area was very high and that it was impossible to determine the long-term health impacts until cancer starts showing up. Vinyl chloride has been a known carcinogen since the 1970s. Because this happened in a poor area, many residents don't have the resources to just pick up and move and are working on suing Norfolk Southern to get the money to relocate. The derailment came about 6 months after a national rail worker strike that was squashed by the federal government. The workers were simply asking to be paid for sick leave and have more people hired for the work done. Norfolk Southern and other railway companies have been deploying precision-scheduled railroading, which reduces safety requirements and increases speeds and cargo loads in the name of efficiency. This has resulted in a net increase of worker fatalities and train derailments, but the companies don't seem to care because it makes them more money to cut corners. Events like this will probably keep happening, therefore, and I believe another one already did. The EPA ordered Norfolk to clean up this mess on their own dime, and if it isn't done right, the EPA will take over the operation and charge Norfolk double the cost. So that's basically the gist of what happened. I just want to add some climate change perspective to the story. Firstly, the chemicals spilled are again used to make PVC plastics. And as a reminder, plastic is primarily made from fossil fuels. So indirectly, this is another case of fossil fuel pollution and shows how dangerous it can be to rely on petroleum for our goods. PVC is one of the most versatile plastics and used in everything from gift cards to windows. It's the third most used form of plastic in the world. It used to be used for food packaging until it was deemed too toxic for that. Because it is so toxic, experts have tried to get PVC added to chemical lists in need of regulation for years. But these efforts have failed as recently as 2021 when the EPA denied a request by the Center for Biological Diversity to have PVC added to its list of hazardous materials. That's likely because PVC has its own lobbying group called the Vinyl Institute, which touts the jobs and money the industry produces. Communities of color in states like Louisiana, Kentucky, and Texas are very familiar with the environmental and health impacts of living near petrochemical facilities. I did a video last year talking about the connection between plastics and fossil fuels, which includes talking about the environmental justice element of this issue, so I'll put that video in the cards if you want to learn more. Living near one of these facilities drastically increases your risk of cancer. Then there's the fact that these plastics aren't being recycled, resulting in the supply chain dishing out waste all throughout it. Greenpeace has suggested that we should try to replace PVC with other materials like clay, glass, ceramics, and linoleum. Others have suggested metal, fiber cement, and stucco, depending on its use, and potentially other types of plastic if you really need to. So that was one of the many deep dives I want to talk about having to do with this story. The other is that railroad companies actually have their own history of climate denialism. Yeah. Despite the Association of American Railroads pushing the narrative that their services are the cleanest way to move cargo, the top 4 American railroad companies, which are Norfolk Southern, BNSF Railway, Union Pacific, and CSX, have continuously fought climate policies and downplayed the science, until recently. Seems a bit counterintuitive, right? It's because they're pro-coal. Nearly 70% of American coal is shipped by rail, often along dedicated lines. That means that coal makes up 1 in every 3 tons of American freight rail. As a result, the largest class of railroads made 14% of its income from transporting coal in 2018. So while rail companies can tout that they have a low direct emissions, the product that they're making billions to ship is anything but. If you take the embedded emissions into account, the percent of U.S. emissions railways contribute jumps from 0.6% to 16.5%. And while the top railway companies tout sustainability targets in the open, behind closed doors, they're giving millions to think tanks and advocacy groups like the American Coalition of Clean Coal Electricity that undermine climate science and climate action policies while promoting oxymoronic concepts like clean coal. That Clean Coal Association that I mentioned, it has since rebranded itself to America's Power, and it's the same organization that Citizens for Responsible Solar cited against the solar industry's production tax credits that I mentioned in the solar video 2 videos ago. I will leave that video in the clips. America's Power keep their members on the DL, but there has been no evidence that the railway companies have ever left this group. One paper concluded that the Association of American Railroads has participated in 8 of the most effective climate denial groups over the last 3 decades. The group has also worked with car companies to keep federal gas mileage requirements low. And in some cases, the railway companies directly put money into destroying climate initiatives, like 3 of the big ones did in Michigan in 2012. So yeah, add railway companies to the list of anti-climate action corporations. It feels like it might actually be shorter to make a list of industries that don't have a history of climate denialism or delay or deception. It's now time for another fun fact about Rue. Rue has another favorite window. Here's his other favorite window. It's right above my little workspace, so that's why he likes it. It's pretty good. And that has been a fun fact about Rue. The world's largest carbon credit certifier, Verra, recently announced that it will no longer allow the use of offsets from rainforest protection schemes to help companies achieve carbon neutrality. The nonprofit has $2 billion worth of voluntary offset agreements with companies like Disney, Gucci, EasyJet, and Shell to help them offset their emissions in exchange for money meant to conserve important carbon-sucking environments or build renewable energy. The carbon offset industry is mostly sketchy because of lack of regulations making it easy for companies to claim carbon neutrality when they are far from it, but that's why Verra is adjusting. I mean, it's not for altruistic reasons, of course, but after a Guardian and source material investigation found widespread problems with Verra's offset scheme, specifically in the rainforest department. They found 90% of Verra's rainforest offset credits didn't represent genuine carbon reductions. Basically, Verra would calculate how much deforestation would take place in an area if no conservation efforts took place. But that was meaningless because they weren't always behind the conservation measures that did happen. And one of the projects that did achieve conservation results, which Verra worked with NGO Conservation International on, included human rights abuses because it required forcing community members from the Alto Mayo, which is on the edge of the Peruvian Amazon, off their land in an effort to reduce deforestation. Most of these people have no recognized rights by the government despite living there for decades, making them an easy target. The project, which accounted for 40% of Disney's carbon offsets from 2012 to 2020, covers land twice the size of New York City. After the investigation was published, Verra saw carbon credit demand drop. So it announced that it will phase out and replace its rainforest carbon credit projects by July 2025, but until that time comes, it will continue to use its system that even its own developers admit are flawed. That being said, many of the projects are likely to change before the cutoff date once the deforestation data comes in. What do you think of the carbon offset industry? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And that was your climate recap for the second half of this week. Remember to talk about the climate crisis every single day and to support your local news organizations. Thank you so much to the people on Patreon who helped support me and my fur baby Rue. A special shout out to the climate confident and courageous David H., Norman Anal, Greg H., Paul B., Phil Plasma, Dan Morton, Nate, Specker, Bree C., climate teacher John J., Deanne, Steve, Kevin Morton, and SKP Joe Korsgold. I greatly appreciate your support of $5 or more. If you would like to support the Beckosphere, please check out the Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links in the description below for reoccurring or one-time payments. Bye for now.